The late afternoon sun cut through the dusty blinds of the high school classroom, casting long shadows across the rows of desks. It was that time of day when everyone felt tired and the air in the room felt heavy and sticky. In the very back corner sat a girl named Maya. She was small and quiet, and she had a way of making herself seem invisible even when she was right there. She wore a large gray hoodie that was 2 sizes too big for her, and she kept the hood pulled up slightly over her dark hair. The other students in the class were loud and restless, shifting in their seats, tapping their pens on the desks and passing notes, but Maya just sat there. She was looking down at her open notebook, but she was not taking notes. She was drawing. She was sketching a pair of hands on the paper, hands that were playing a piano. Maya loved music more than anything in the world, but she never talked about it to anyone at school. She had a secret life outside of these walls, a life where she practiced on an old upright piano in her garage for hours every night until her fingers hurt. But here in this classroom she was just the quiet girl who never spoke up. At the front of the room stood Mr. Clark. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it was permanently set in a frown. He wore a stiff suit and a tie that was always done up too tight. Mr. Clark did not like wasting time, and he did not like students who he thought were wasting time either. He believed that music was serious business. He believed in discipline and theory and following the rules. He walked back and forth at the front of the room holding a thick textbook. He was talking about the history of classical music. His voice was loud and booming, and it echoed off the white walls as he paced. He looked out over the sea of students like a hawk looking for prey. He wanted to see who was paying attention and who was not. He stopped his pacing suddenly and turned his head slowly. His eyes narrowed as he looked toward the back of the room. Maya did not see him looking. She was too focused on her drawing. She was shading in the keys of the piano she had drawn. She was thinking about a song she had heard on the radio earlier that morning and how she would play it if she had the chance. She let her mind wander away from the boring lecture and into the music in her head. She did not notice that the room had suddenly gone quiet. The other students had stopped talking and shifting. They had all gone still because they knew what was happening. They knew that Mr. Clark had found a target. A boy in the front row named Tyler looked back at Maya with a warning look in his eyes, but Maya did not see him. She was still in her own world. Mr. Clark began to walk down the aisle between the desks. His shoes made a heavy clicking sound on the tiled floor. Click, click, click. The sound got louder as he got closer to the back of the room. The students on either side of the aisle sat up straighter. They fixed their eyes on their notebooks. They pretended to be working very hard. They did not want to be next. The air in the room seemed to get even heavier, thick with tension. The clicking sound stopped right next to Maya's desk. A shadow fell over her notebook, covering the piano. Hands she was drawing. Maya froze. She felt a cold drop of sweat run down her back. She knew who was standing there without even looking up. She slowly moved her hand to cover the drawing, but it was too late. "So this is what you think is important," Mr. Clark said, his voice low and dangerous. He did not shout, but his voice carried across the silent room. Maya looked up slowly, her heart beating very fast in her chest. She looked into Mr. Clark's stern face. He was looking down at her with a look of disgust and disappointment. He picked up her notebook and looked at the drawing. He shook his head slowly and let out a short, harsh laugh that made a few students flinch. "We are discussing the structure of the symphony," Mr. Clark said, holding the notebook up so everyone could see her drawing. He did not say her name, but everyone knew who he was talking to. "We are talking about history and culture and genius, but you are back here playing doodle games." He looked around the room at the other students. "See, class, this is the problem with your generation. You think everything is a game. You think you can just float through life doing whatever you want." He looked back at Maya, his eyes cold. "You think this is going to get you anywhere in life, drawing little pictures?" Maya felt her face get hot. She could feel the eyes of every single student in the class burning into her. Some of them were looking at her with pity, others were smirking, glad that it was not them. She wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. She wanted to grab her bag and run out of the room, but she was frozen. Her throat felt dry and tight. She could not find her voice to speak. She just looked down at her desk, her hands shaking slightly in her lap. I try to teach you about the masters. Mr. Clark continued. He was pacing again, now waving his hands in the air. I try to give you knowledge that will last a lifetime, but you sit there and ignore me. You are wasting my time and you are wasting your own time. He walked back to the front of the class and slammed Maya's notebook down on his desk with a loud bang that made everyone jump. He stood there for a moment looking at the class, his face red. He was angry now. He felt disrespected. He needed to prove a point. He needed to show everyone that slacking off was not going to happen in his classroom. He looked over at the corner of the room where a shiny black grand piano sat. It was covered in a thin layer of dust because no one ever played it. It was just for show, really a prop for the school concerts. But Mr. Clark had an idea. A cruel idea popped into his head, a way to teach this girl a lesson once and for all. He looked at Maya and a small mean smile appeared on his face. You think you are so special sitting back there in your hoodies, Mr. Clark said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You think you are too good for my class. Maybe we should see if you are actually as smart as you think you are, or maybe you are just all talk. He walked over to the piano and took the cover off the keys. The dust floated in the air. He opened the lid and the bright reflection of the room shone on the black surface. He walked to a shelf and pulled out a thick book of sheet music. It was a book of advanced pieces, difficult pieces that only very skilled players could attempt. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for, a piece by Liszt. It was fast and complicated and required hands that moved like lightning. He walked back to the piano bench and placed the open book on the stand. Come up here, Mr. Clark said, pointing a finger at Maya. The room went dead silent. No one breathed. Everyone was looking at Maya. Come up here and show us your talent. Since you seem to know so much about music that you can ignore my lecture, let us hear what you have got. Play this. Maya looked at the piano. Her heart stopped. She knew that song. She knew it very well. She had been practicing it at home for months, but she could not let them know she could play it. If she played it well, she would no longer be invisible. If she played it badly, she would be humiliated forever. She sat there glued to her chair, her face pale. I am waiting, Mr. Clark said, crossing his arms over his chest. Don't be shy now, stand up and come to the piano, unless of course you admit that you were just wasting my time and that you have no talent whatsoever. The class was silent, waiting, watching. Maya looked around the room and saw 30 faces staring at her. She saw Tyler in the front row shaking his head slightly, telling her not to do it, but Mr. Clark was not going to back down. He was going to stand there until she moved or until the bell rang. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, tock tock tock. Each second felt like an hour. Maya took a deep breath. She wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans. She realized she had no choice. She had to stand up. She had to go up there. She slowly pushed her chair back. The sound screeched loudly on the floor and she stood up. Her legs felt weak like jelly. She began the long walk down the aisle toward the piano at the front of the room, toward the teacher who wanted to embarrass her and the class who was waiting to see what would happen. The walk from her desk to the front of the room felt like the longest walk Maya had ever taken in her life. The floor seemed to stretch out endlessly beneath her feet. With every step her heart beat harder against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. She could hear the sound of her own breathing in her ears. In and out, in and out. The room was so incredibly quiet that the sound of her sneakers squeaking on the floor seemed as loud as a gunshot. She kept her eyes down, looking at the scratched tiles. She did not want to see the faces of the other students. She did not want to see their pity or their amusement. She knew they were watching her. She could feel 30 pairs of eyes burning into her back. It made her skin feel hot and prickly. Mr. Clark stood by the piano with his arms folded tightly across his chest. He was tapping his foot impatiently on the floor. A smug smile played on his lips. He was enjoying this. He thought he had won. He thought he was teaching her a lesson about respect and hard work. But really he was just being cruel. He wanted to see her fail. He wanted to see her struggle with the notes and then run back to her seat in tears. He wanted to prove to everyone that there was no place in his class for daydreamers. When Maya finally reached the piano, she stopped and stood in front of it. The instrument loomed over her, large and black and shiny. It smelled like old wood and lemon polish. Up close the piano looked like a sleeping beast waiting to be woken up. Mr. Clark stepped aside slightly and gestured to the bench with a flourish of his hand. "Well, sit down," he said, his voice sharp and demanding. "We do not have all day." Maya slowly lowered herself onto the bench. It was hard and cold. She adjusted the distance slightly, sliding it forward so her knees were just under the keys. This was a familiar feeling. Sitting at a piano was the one place in the world where she felt safe. Usually when she sat down to play, she was alone in her garage with the door shut. There were no people watching her. There was no one judging her. It was just her and the music. But this was different. This was a stage. And the audience was waiting for a crash. She looked up at the music sheet on the stand. The notes were black little ants marching across the white paper in complicated lines. To anyone else in the room it probably looked like a foreign language. Like a code that could not be broken. Tyler in the front row squinted at the music and shook his head. He knew how to read music a little bit from band class. And he knew that this piece was way too hard for a normal student. He thought Maya was going to embarrass herself. He felt bad for her. Mr. Clark leaned down close to her ear. "Go ahead," he whispered loud enough for the first row to hear. "Play the first page. Or is it too difficult for you? Maybe you should stick to drawing." Maya ignored him. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She stared at the page. Her eyes focused on the title of the piece. She knew this piece. She knew it by heart. She had been listening to a recording of it every night for a month. She had tried to play parts of it on her old keyboard at home. She knew the rhythm. She knew the melody. Her fingers twitched in her lap. They remembered the patterns. A wave of nerves washed over her. If she played badly they would laugh. If she played well they would stare. Both options seemed terrifying. But she realized that sitting there doing nothing was worse. Mr. Clark wanted to break her spirit. He wanted to show her that she was small and unimportant. Anger bubbled up inside her chest. A small spark of fire. She was not unimportant. She was Maya. And she had music in her that he knew nothing about. She placed her hands on the keys. The plastic felt cool and smooth under her fingertips. She flexed her fingers slightly, getting the blood flowing. Mr. Clark checked his watch and sighed loudly. "I am waiting," he said. The class held its breath. This was the moment. Maya closed her eyes for just a second. She blocked out the teacher. She blocked out the students. She blocked out the dusty classroom and the smell of chalk. In her mind she was back in her garage. She saw the poster of her favorite pianist on the wall. She heard the rain on the roof. She felt calm. She opened her eyes and looked at the keys. She was not going to just play notes. She was going to play the music. Without another word of warning she pressed down the first key. It was a single deep note that rang out clear and strong. Then her left hand jumped in. And then her right. The room filled with sound. It was not the hesitant plinking of a beginner. It was confident and loud. Mr. Clark opened his mouth to say something, but the sound stopped him. The music poured out of the piano like a river. Fast and furious. The students in the back row sat up straight. The girl next to Tyler dropped her pen on the floor, but she did not even bend down to pick it up. Everyone was staring at Maya. Her hands were moving so fast they were almost a blur. She was not looking at her hands. She was looking at the music. But her fingers knew exactly where to go. It was like magic. The music filled every corner of the room. It pushed away the heavy air and the tension. The sounds of the classical masterpiece swirled around them. It was beautiful and powerful. Mr. Clark slowly lowered his arms. The smug smile disappeared from his face. He took a step back. He blinked. He looked at the girl in the gray hoodie. The girl who never spoke. The girl he thought was nothing. And for the first time he saw someone else. The tempo picked up. The music became faster and more intricate. The rhythm bounced off the walls. It was a complicated dance of notes. Maya swayed slightly with the music. Her hood slipped back a little, revealing her focused face. She was biting her lip slightly, a sign of her deep concentration. She was not nervous anymore. She was in the zone. The music was taking her away. She played a run of high notes that sounded like raindrops falling on a tin roof. Then she crashed down into a deep chord that made the piano vibrate. The students in the class were not bored anymore. They were not whispering or passing notes. They were completely still. They were captivated. Some of them had their mouths open slightly. They had never heard anything like this come from that piano before. They had never heard anything like this come from anyone in their school. The quiet girl in the back was not quiet anymore. She was speaking. But she was not using words. She was using the piano. Tyler watched her hands moving up and down the keyboard. He could not believe what he was seeing. He remembered how M.R. Clark had made fun of her. He looked at M.R. Clark. The teacher looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was pale. His mouth was hanging open slightly. He was standing stiffly by his desk. His plan had backfired completely. He had tried to embarrass her. But instead she was showing him up. She was showing all of them up. The music got louder and more intense. Maya did not hold back. She put all her feelings into the keys. All the times she felt invisible. All the times she felt alone. All the hours she spent practicing in the dark. It was all coming out now. The sound was incredible. It filled the room with energy. It was a true story unfolding in sound. A story of talent that had been hidden. A story of a girl who was finally being heard. The piece was moving toward the end of the first section. The notes were getting higher and faster. The tension in the music was building. The class was leaning forward in their seats. They were hooked. They needed to hear what happened next. M.R. Clark took another step back until he was leaning against the chalkboard. He did not know what to do. He could not stop her. He did not want to stop her. The music was too good. It was undeniable. He realized in that moment that he had made a mistake. A big mistake. He looked at Maya with a new kind of respect mixed with fear. He had woken up something he did not understand. And he could not put it back to sleep. The final chord of the section approached. Maya took a deep breath. Her hands flew up the keyboard. And then she brought them down hard. The sound rang out. The last note echoed in the silence. But Maya did not stop. She immediately went into the next part. She was just getting started. Maya did not stop playing when the first section ended because the music demanded to be heard. She moved straight into the harder parts of the piece, her fingers dancing over the keys with a speed that was hard to follow. The sound coming from the instrument was no longer just a collection of notes, it was a living, breathing thing that filled the entire classroom. The vibrations hummed in the floorboards and rattled the pictures on the walls. The students sat frozen in their seats, unable to look away. They had never seen anything like this in their lives. The quiet girl who never spoke was screaming and laughing and crying through the piano. It was a side of her they never knew existed. She swayed back and forth as she played, her body moving with the rhythm. Her eyes were closed now. She did not need to look at the sheet music anymore. She knew every single note by heart. She had practiced this song in the dark of her garage 1,000 times, but this was different. This time she was not playing for herself. She was playing for every time she had been ignored. She was playing for every time Mr. Clark had made her feel small. She poured all of her frustration and her anger and her joy into the music. The piano responded to her touch. The sound was rich and full and incredibly powerful. Tyler sat in the front row with his mouth open. He looked from the piano to Mr. Clark and back again. The teacher was standing completely still, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. The smirk was long gone, replaced by a look of pure shock. His face had turned a pale shade of white. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He tried to speak or clear his throat, but the sound was swallowed by the music. He realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought he was dealing with a student who did not care, but he was dealing with a master. He had challenged a lion and now he was trapped in the cage with her. The melody changed tempo, becoming faster and more frantic. Maya's hands were a blur. They moved so fast that her fingers looked like they were not even touching the keys. The song was difficult. It required a strength in the wrists and a flexibility in the fingers that most professional musicians worked for years to achieve, but she made it look easy. She made it look like breathing. The sound was sharp and percussive, like hail hitting a metal roof. Then it would soften into a gentle hum that made the room feel peaceful and safe. The contrast was beautiful and it kept the class on the edge of their seats. Deep down in her soul, Maya felt a sense of freedom that she had never felt before. At school she was always the quiet one, the one who hid in the back, but here she was exposed. Her true self was on display for everyone to see, and it felt terrifying and amazing at the same time. She could feel the sweat on her forehead and her back. Her muscles burned with the effort, but she did not slow down. She pushed harder. She wanted to show them that she was more than just a girl in a hoodie. She was a musician. The other students in the class had completely forgotten about the bell. They had forgotten about their phones and their gossip. They were witnessing something rare. They were witnessing a moment of true greatness in a place where moments like that usually never happened. A girl named Jessica, who usually sat in the middle row and painted her nails during class, was actually crying. She did not know why, but the music just moved her. It touched something inside her chest that she did not know was there. Even the boys who usually messed around and threw paper balls were sitting still. They were tapping their feet on the floor, silently feeling the beat. Mr. Clark took a few steps backward until he bumped into his desk. He could not take his eyes off Maya's hands. He knew enough about music to know that what she was doing was nearly impossible for someone her age. He looked at the sheet music on the stand and then back at her hands. She was playing notes that were not even on the page. She was improvising, adding her own flair and style to the classic piece. It was a bold move that only a true artist would dare to make. He felt a strange mix of emotions. He felt embarrassed for being so arrogant, and he felt a grudging respect for the student he had misjudged so badly. The music grew louder and more intense. The chords were huge and crashing like ocean waves. Maya was hitting the keys with force. Now her whole body was involved. She stood up slightly to put more weight into the notes. The sound filled the room, shaking the windows. It was a sonic boom that demanded attention. The physical energy coming from the small piano was intense. The air around the instrument seemed to shimmer with the sound waves. The class could feel the bass notes in their chests. It was a physical experience, not just an auditory one. Maya felt her heart racing in time with the music. She was in a state of flow where her mind and her hands were perfectly connected. She was not thinking about what to play next. Her hands just knew the song was telling a story of a battle and a victory, and she was the hero of that story. She thought about all the nights she spent practicing while other kids were at parties or watching movies. She thought about her worn-out piano books and her tired fingers. She realized that all that work had led to this moment. Every missed hour of sleep had been worth it. As the song climbed toward its highest point, the tension in the room became unbearable. Everyone was leaning forward, waiting to see where she would take them next. The music was getting faster and faster, spiraling upwards like a bird climbing into the sky. The notes were intricate and woven together like a tapestry of sound. Maya's focus was absolute. She blocked out everything else. The world outside the window disappeared. The teacher disappeared. The other students disappeared. There was only her and the music. She launched into a run of notes that were so high and fast they sounded like glitter falling. She was playing at the very top of the keyboard, her right hand flying while her left hand kept a steady grounding rhythm. It was a display of sheer technical brilliance that left the audience breathless. Mr. Clark closed his eyes for a moment just to listen to the purity of the sound. He had never heard a student play with such passion and precision. It was humbling for him to stand there and listen to the very person he had tried to embarrass just moments before. The energy in the room was shifting. The cruelty of Mr. Clark's challenge was being washed away by the beauty of her response. The students were not thinking about the teacher anymore, they were only thinking about Maya and the miracle happening in front of them. The class bully who usually sat in the back and made fun of everyone looked down at his desk feeling ashamed. He realized that he had no idea who people really were. He had judged Maya just like everyone else and he had been wrong. Maya felt the crescendo building. It was time for the final push. She took a deep breath and focused all her energy on her fingers. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins, giving her power. She was going to end this section with a bang. She wanted to leave them speechless. She wanted to leave them with a memory that would last forever. She moved her hands to the center of the keyboard and began to play the most difficult passage of the entire piece, a series of jumps and runs that tested the limits of human speed. Her hands leaped across the keys, landing perfectly every time. It was a display of athleticism as much as artistry. Her arms moved like wings. Her posture was strong and confident. The hoodie was forgotten. Her head was held high. She was not the shy girl anymore. She was a performer. The transformation was total. The class watched in awe, witnessing the birth of a new identity right before their eyes. The sound swelled to a fever pitch. The room vibrated with the intensity of the performance. Maya was sweating now, her hair sticking to her forehead, but she did not care. She was in the home stretch. The music was leading her to the climax and she followed without hesitation. She struck the keys with conviction and fire. The piano sang under her touch, reaching a volume that seemed impossible for such a small instrument. She was daring Mr. Clark to say something now. She was daring anyone to say that she did not belong in this class. The notes cascaded down the scale like a waterfall rushing over the edge of a cliff. It was a breathtaking rush of sound that made everyone gasp. The speed was incredible, the precision was absolute, and then just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos slowed down. The rapid notes transformed into long smooth chords that floated in the air like clouds. The tension released, leaving a feeling of peace and awe in its wake. Maya slowed her breathing, her hands moving gently now, caressing the keys rather than striking them. She was entering the final phase, the most beautiful and emotional part of the song, the part where the music stripped away all the noise and left only the raw feeling. It was a moment of pure vulnerability. The students were silent, completely captivated by the change in mood. Even Mr. Clark had forgotten to breathe. He was standing by his desk looking like a man who had just witnessed a miracle. He knew that he could never look at Maya the same way again. She had proven him wrong in the most spectacular way possible, and there was nothing he could say or do to take it back. The final notes were approaching and Maya knew it. She gathered her strength one last time. She was going to make this ending count. She was going to make sure that everyone in this room remembered this day for the rest of their lives. She placed her hands over the keys and paused for just a fraction of a second, a heartbeat of silence before the nth. Intensity in the room kept rising as Maya played on. She was in the final stretch now, the most difficult part of the entire song. Her hands moved like they had a mind of their own, jumping from the low end of the keyboard to the high end with perfect accuracy. The sound was huge and overwhelming. It filled every corner of the classroom, bouncing off the walls and vibrating through the floorboards. The students felt the deep bass notes in their chests. It was like a heartbeat that everyone could feel. The music was not just noise anymore, it was a living force that had taken control of the space. Maya was sweating now. A small bead of sweat rolled down her temple and dripped onto the piano keys, but she did not wipe it away. She did not stop. She could not stop. She was too close to the end. Her fingers were starting to ache from the effort, but she used that pain to push even harder. She wanted the sound to be perfect. She wanted every note to sing out clearly and loudly. She leaned over the keys, putting her whole body into the music. The gray hoodie slipped further down her shoulder, but she did not care. She was exposed, but she felt strong for the first time in her life. She was not hiding anymore. The melody went faster and faster. It was a blur of black and white keys. The was frantic and exciting, like a chase scene in a movie. The students were on the edge of their seats. Some of them were leaning forward so far that they were almost out of their desks. They had never seen anything like this in real life. It was like watching a video on fast forward, but the sound was perfect and clear. The boy in the front row, whose name was Tyler, had his hands clenched together in his lap. He was holding his breath without realizing it. He knew that this was a special moment, a moment that would be talked about in the school for years to come. Mr. Clark was still standing near his desk, but he looked like a different man now. His face was pale and his eyes were wide. He had stopped checking his watch. He had stopped looking at the clock. He was staring at Maya with a mixture of fear and wonder. He realized that he had completely misjudged her. He had treated her like a child who did not understand music, but she was playing with more soul and technique than he could ever hope to teach. He felt a knot of shame form in his stomach. He saw the notebook on his desk with her drawing, and it suddenly looked like a treasure instead of a distraction. He felt small in the presence of her talent. The music soared upward, reaching higher and higher pitches. The notes were delicate and sharp, like glass breaking in the sun. Then suddenly the music changed direction. It came crashing back down. The deep notes boomed like thunder, shaking the windows in their frames. The contrast was thrilling. The class gasped as one person. It was an emotional roller coaster. They could feel the anger and the sadness and the joy in the music. Maya was telling them a story without using a single word. She was showing them who she really was. She was showing them the fire that burned inside her that no one had ever bothered to look for before. She remembered all the times she had sat in this very room feeling invisible. She remembered the whispers and the laughs. She remembered feeling like she did not belong. She poured all those memories into the keys. Now with every strike of the piano she was proving them wrong. She was proving that she mattered, that she had a voice that deserved to be heard. The sound was fierce and defiant. It was a roar of triumph. The students could feel it. They realized that they had been wrong about her too. They felt bad for underestimating her for so long. They saw the girl in the back row not as the quiet weird kid, but as a powerful and talented person. The tempo increased to a fever pitch. Her fingers were flying so fast they were almost a blur. The sound was a torrent of notes rushing down a mountain. It was unstoppable. It was terrifying and beautiful all at the same time. The room felt electric. The air was thick with the energy of the performance. Maya was lost in the music. She was not thinking about school or the teacher or the grades. She was just a vessel for the sound. She was free. Then the music began to slow down. The frantic rushing notes transformed into long slow chords. The tension in the room shifted from excitement to anticipation. The sound became softer and more gentle. It was like the storm was passing and the sun was coming out. The notes floated in the air, hanging there for a long time before fading away. The class leaned in closer, listening to the quiet. They did not want to miss a single sound. The silence between the notes was just as important as the notes themselves. Maya played a gentle melody that was sad and sweet at the same time. It tugged at the heartstrings of everyone listening. It was a farewell. The music was saying goodbye. The boy in the back, who usually made fun of everyone, felt a strange lump in his throat. He did not know why, but he wanted to clap. He wanted to cheer, but he could not move. The music held him captive. It was a spell that no one wanted to break. She reached the final phrase. Her hands moved with grace and precision. She played the notes with a tenderness that made the piano sound like it was singing a lullaby. The sound was pure and clean. It floated up to the ceiling and filled the room with a golden light. She could feel the end coming. She knew exactly when it would happen. She took a deep breath and prepared for the last moment. Her hands came together for the final chord. She struck the keys with confidence and power. It was a perfect sound, full and resonant. The chord hung in the air like a cloud, ringing out clearly and beautifully. She held her hands down on the keys, letting the sound sustain, letting it fill every corner of the room, letting it wash over Mr. Clark and the students. The vibration was the last thing they felt before the silence took over. Then Maya lifted her hands off the keys. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. No one moved, no one spoke. The echo of the final chord seemed to hover in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. It was a magical silence, a sacred silence. The sound had been so big that the quiet felt even bigger in comparison. The air in the room felt different. It felt cleared out, as if the music had pushed away all the boredom and the tension and the cruelty. Maya sat on the bench with her hands in her lap. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling with the effort. She could hear her own heartbeat thumping in her ears. She was afraid to look up. She was afraid to see their faces. She did not know if they would laugh or stare or mock her. She kept her eyes focused on her knees. Her fingers were trembling slightly. The adrenaline was leaving her body, making her feel shaky and weak. Mr. Clark stood frozen by his desk. His mouth was slightly open. His glasses had slipped down his nose a bit, but he did not push them up. He looked at the piano and then he looked at Maya. His face was a mask of shock and confusion. His brain was trying to process what had just happened. He had prepared himself to hear a clumsy amateur attempt. He had prepared himself to scold her and send her back to her seat. Instead, he had witnessed a masterpiece. He had no idea how to react. His authority had vanished. Tyler and the other students were still staring. They were looking at the quiet girl in the gray hoodie as if she was a stranger who had just walked into the room. They were seeing the real Maya for the first time, the genius that had been hiding in plain sight. The girl who never spoke had just screamed her soul out to them and they were stunned. It was the most amazing thing most of them had ever seen in real life. A few seconds passed which felt like hours. The dust continued to drift in the sunbeams. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, but no one cared about time anymore. They were living in the afterglow of the music. The shock was beginning to wear off and was being replaced by something else, a feeling of respect, a feeling of awe. They all knew that they had just experienced a life-changing moment, a moment where the underdog rose up and showed the world what she was made of. Maya slowly lifted her head and looked out at the room. Her eyes were bright and her cheeks were flushed. She saw the stunned faces. She saw Mr. Clark looking defeated and she saw her classmates looking at her with new eyes. She realized that she was not invisible anymore. The spell was broken. The secret was out and there was no going back. Silence that filled the room after the final note was heavy and thick like a blanket. It was not an awkward silence but a sacred one. The air seemed to vibrate with the memory of the music that had just filled the space. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams looked like they were suspended in time. The echo of the last chord hung in the air, slowly fading away until it was just a whisper in the ears of the students. Maya sat on the piano bench with her hands resting in her lap. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling with the effort of the performance. Her fingers felt hot and tingly as if they were glowing with a strange energy. She was staring at the black and white keys but she was not really seeing them. Her mind was still racing with the rhythm of the song. She was afraid to look up. She did not know what she would find on the faces of her classmates. She worried that she would see laughter or boredom or confusion. She worried that the magic she had felt was only in her own head. Then the silence was broken by a sharp sound that made Maya jump. It was the sound of hands clapping together, not a polite golf clap but a loud steady slap. It came from the front row. Tyler was sitting there with a huge smile on his face. He was looking right at Maya and he was clapping with all his might. He did not care that Mr. Clark was standing right there. He did not care that it was against the rules to make noise. He was showing his appreciation. At first the sound seemed lonely in the big empty room, but then a girl in the second row joined in. She was a quiet girl who usually sat near the window and she started clapping too. Then the boy in the football jersey who usually slept through class started clapping. The sound grew like a wave rolling across the ocean. It got louder and faster and stronger. It was a roar of approval that washed over the entire class. The students were not just clapping, they were standing up, they were pushing their chairs back and getting to their feet. Within seconds the whole class was on their feet. They were cheering and whistling and stomping their feet. The noise was deafening. It was a wall of sound that shook the windows in their frames. They were looking at Maya with wide eyes and open mouths. They were looking at her as if she was a superhero who had just revealed her secret identity. The invisible girl in the back row was not invisible anymore. She was the center of the universe in that room. Maya felt a rush of heat go up her neck and into her cheeks. She knew she was blushing a deep red. She felt exposed in a way she had never felt before, but it was not a bad feeling. It was a feeling of power. She had never realized that playing the piano could make people feel this way. She had played for herself for so long in her garage with no one listening that she had forgotten what it felt like to share music. It was intoxicating. She slowly stood up from the bench. Her legs felt a little bit shaky like jelly. She smoothed down her oversized gray hoodie and took a deep breath. She looked out at the sea of faces. They were all looking at her with respect and wonder. Even the bully who usually made fun of everyone was standing quietly clapping his hands. He looked down at his feet looking ashamed. Maya realized that he finally understood that she was a person with feelings and talent, not just a target for his jokes. Mr. Clark was the only person in the room who was not clapping. He was standing near his desk looking like a statue. His face was pale and his mouth was slightly open. His glasses had slipped down his nose and he did not even push them up. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He looked completely defeated. His plan to embarrass Maya had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. He had tried to break her spirit, but instead he had made her a star. He did not know what to do with his hands, so he just let them hang by his sides. Maya looked at him and saw the shock in his eyes. She saw that he realized he had made a mistake. She did not feel angry at him anymore. She just felt a quiet sense of victory. She did not need to say anything to him. The music had said it all. She closed the sheet music book with a gentle thud, treating the piano with care. It was a silent thank you to the instrument that had given her a voice. She started to walk back down the aisle toward her desk. As she walked, the students reached out to touch her sleeve or give her a high five. They moved their backpacks out of the way to let her pass. They were treating her like a celebrity. It was a strange and wonderful feeling for a girl who was used to people walking right past her in the hallways like she did not exist. She kept her head down and smiled, a small shy smile, but her heart was soaring. When she reached her desk, she sat down and pulled her hood back up over her head. It was a reflex, a way to hide herself again, but she knew that things were different now. She could never go back to being completely invisible. She took a drink of water from the bottle in her bag. Her hands were still shaking a little bit from the adrenaline rush. She looked around the room and saw that everyone was still standing and looking at her, waiting for her to do something else, but the performance was over. Mr. Clark finally seemed to snap out of his trance. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to regain control of the class. The noise died down a little as the students sat back down, but they kept their eyes on Maya. They did not want to look at the teacher. They were still buzzing with the excitement of what they had just witnessed. "That was Mr. Clark," said. His voice sounded weak and cracked in the middle of the sentence. He cleared his throat again and tried to make his voice sound deeper and more authoritative. "That was quite interesting," he said, but the words sounded hollow and stupid. The students let out a collective groan. Quite interesting was the worst description they could imagine for the amazing thing they had just heard. He looked down at his papers and shuffled them nervously, avoiding eye contact with Maya. He realized that he could not scold her for playing too loud or for disrupting the class, because she had done exactly what he asked her to do. She had played the music, but she had done it with a skill and passion that he could not deny. He felt small in front of his students. He knew that they knew that he had lost this battle. Maya just nodded at him and opened her notebook. She went back to the drawing she had been working on before, the sketch of the hands playing the piano. She looked at it with new eyes. Now the hands on the paper looked stronger. They looked like her hands. She picked up her pencil and started to shade in the keys, adding more detail to the picture. She was calm now. She felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that she had proved her point. The bell rang, finally signaling the end of the school day. Usually the sound of the bell would make the students jump up and run for the door, but today nobody moved. Immediately they gathered their things slowly, reluctant to leave the bubble of energy that had formed in the room. A few kids came up to Maya's desk on their way out. "You were amazing," one girl whispered. "You should play for us again," said another boy. Maya looked up at them and smiled. It was a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thanks," she said softly. It was the first time most of them had ever heard her speak. Tyler walked by her desk and paused for a second. He looked at her with a look of genuine respect. "Good job," he said, and tapped her desk lightly with his hand. Maya nodded back at him. "Thanks, Tyler," she said. His name felt natural in her mouth. Eventually the room emptied out, leaving just Maya and Mr. Clark and the piano. Maya packed up her bag slowly, making sure she had all her books and her pencil case. She swung the heavy bag onto her shoulder and stood up. She walked toward the door of the classroom. Mr. Clark was still standing at the front near the piano, looking lost. She paused in the doorway and looked back at him. He looked older than he had that morning. His shoulders were slumped and he looked tired. He looked up and saw her waiting. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to apologize, but he did not know the words, so he just stood there, You should not judge people by how quiet they are, Maya said. Her voice was clear and steady. It echoed slightly in the empty room. I know, Maya, Mr. Clark said quietly. He looked down at his feet. I am sorry. Maya nodded at him. It was enough. She did not need a long apology. She knew that he would never look at her the same way again, and that was enough for her. She turned and walked out of the classroom into the busy hallway. The school was noisy and chaotic as usual. Kids were shouting and running to their lockers, slamming doors and laughing, but Maya walked through it all in a bubble of peace. She walked with her head up and her shoulders back. She did not pull her hoodie over her face. She let them see her. She walked out the front doors of the school into the cool afternoon air. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the parking lot. Maya walked toward the street, thinking about her old piano at home, thinking about the dust on the keys and the uneven pedals. She thought about the hours she spent practicing alone, feeling like nobody cared, but now she knew that things were going to be different. She had a voice and she knew how to use it. She was not just the quiet girl in the back row anymore. She was a musician, and the world was going to hear her play.